Welcome to Private Equity Profits. Clifford Locks is a certified board of director, a trusted confidant to CEOs, C-level exec, and high-potential employees to help them clarify goals, unlock their potential, and create actionable strategic plans. Seth Green is the nation's foremost authority on growing your portfolio companies with direct response marketing. He is the founder of the direct response marketing firm Market Domination LLC, and he is an 8-time best-selling author who has been interviewed on NBC, CBS, Forbes Inc., CBS Money Watch, and many more. Cliff and Seth interview top players in the financial sector, focusing on private equity firms, venture capital companies, and family offices, discussing developments and trends shaping the industry. These experts will share with you how they've grown their businesses and increased profit, and how you can too. And now, here's your host, Seth Green.
Welcome to the podcast. This is your co-host, Seth Green. Today I have the good fortune to be interviewing Joel Magerman of Emerald Park Capital. He is a successful investor, principal, and investment banker with over 30 years of experience. During the course of his career, he's been involved in closing approximately 150 deals, representing a total transaction value in excess of $6 billion. Joel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
So let's go back in time a little bit. How did you get started?
Geez, it's so long ago. I started working on the business side of new business opportunities in the early 80s, and sort of saw how interesting it was in new business formation, and sort of followed that path, circuitous route, but followed it over the next, few decades.
I'm sure the longer version of that story could probably fill a book somewhere if it hasn't already. Tell us a little, you're up to some really interesting things. Tell us a little bit about Emerald Park.
Yeah, Emerald Park is a provider of capital, predominantly debt, but also can provide equity as well in the cannabis sector. And it was very interesting to us because it's a sector that has been growing exponentially, compounded annual growth rate of 25 to 30% over a 10-year period, but was significantly underserved in its access to capital. And we thought that created a unique opportunity for us to raise a fund and actually be one of those capital providers.
So why do you think, for our folks who may not be aware, why do you think the cannabis industry has been neglected and underserved in this department?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. Number one, there was initially federal legislation that made people uncomfortable providing capital in the space. A number of things have happened over the last 5 to 7 years, including 42 states that now consider it legal. And a number of things that have happened under federal guidelines that provide greater comfort, but there's some ambiguity in that. And that ambiguity has caused a number of companies and firms to be uncomfortable providing capital there still, even though an increasing number of folks have continued to get comfortable and more capital is coming into the sector.
And it's not just debt, right? It's also that historically there have been issues getting, merchant processing, credit card processing, bank accounts, yes, literally everything. Why do you think you've been quoted? Why do you think this is the new ground floor of cannabis?
Well, I mean, we're in the very early stages, right? There's if you sort of think of the evolution and think about alcohol right after Prohibition, by example, right? We're in the early stages because right now there are states that it's still illegal. There are states where it's legal, but only for medicinal purposes. And there's states where it's legal for medicinal and adult use, recreational use. And so we're still a long ways away from, it being approved at a federal level where it can be used in every state across the union based on each one of the state's laws and the Fed approving it. And so we're probably, some number of years away from, that happening. And then people need to get comfortable with the usage of it, like anything else. When you have something that is, initially, for example, approved for cancer patients, or there's a number of drugs where cannabis is approved, people still don't necessarily understand it. And nor do, state and federal government. And so once everybody gets comfortable, I think there'll be a continual growth in that.
Absolutely. Now, you chose to predominantly focus on the debt part of the sector. Why'd you go in that direction as opposed to, equity?
Again, I think it was there are two reasons really. Number one, I think it was more underserved. There was less access to capital on the debt side than the equity side. Number two, I think that our personal bias, and we have a lot of money in the fund, is that we sort of liked the risk reward arbitrage on the debt side. If you financed a non-cannabis business that looks, call it small to middle market, depending on what you're financing, let's say you're financing real estate, you might get a 5% loan. And if you're doing junior debt, you may pay 15%. In the cannabis sector, to take that same economic risk, you were probably getting 3 to 5 times your potential returns. And so we thought that was a great risk-adjusted return profile for us. And it was an underserved spot in the marketplace. And so we thought it was a good place to be, further underserved. Now, that being said, we've also made a couple equity investments as well. So we're very supportive of helping companies grow, whether it be on the debt or the equity side of the balance sheet, but we prefer debt.
That makes total sense. Now, it seems like every other day there's another company popping up in some way, shape, or form in the space. Talk a little bit about your vetting process and your due diligence, because you're kind of known for making really smart decisions.
Well, I mean, one of the things that, being old means you have experience in seeing lots of things. So we've seen lots of deals and transactions over our lifetime, and we have certain things that we think are important to focus on, and we incorporate that in our vetting process. To date, we've seen in excess of 725 deals. We've made 8 investments. So, that being said, we've probably bid on 2 to 3 times that number of transactions, and for various reasons, either we learned something we didn't like, or they maybe got better pricing, whatever the case might be. But we have a pretty rigorous process. We want to make sure that we and our investors get our money back, and as a result of that, hope is not a plan, right? And so if people don't have the things you need to be comfortable, we don't want to just hope we get our money back. We really want to have analytics and comfort that says we're going to get it back. And we really try to be thoughtful in our approach and understand the company well, which means you need to do a lot of work. And some of these companies didn't have and don't have the infrastructure, the people to support, to give us the information and the data we need to be comfortable.
If I heard you correctly, you had about a 1% rate in terms of the deals that you actually bid on and accepted. So what are some of the things that are warning signs to you to stay away?
Lack of internal controls is a major one. People don't have the appropriate financial systems, and that's critical in this sector. You mentioned banking relationships. Those are much less of an issue than people think, but some folks don't have it. Very few folks have audited financials, which is a big deal for us. We want someone to have a third party review those financials and get comfortable with those. And some of it's the sophistication of management. Coming up with an idea, and so I'm making this up, but someone to say, I want to build a chain of 50 dispensaries. Well, building one and operating one dispensary does take some skill, but building and operating 50 dispensaries is a different skill set. And so some people are skilled in opening and operating number one, but they don't have the wherewithal to open 50. And so some of it is just the breadth and depth of management.
What are you finding are some of the most common challenges that these cannabis companies are facing other than access to debt?
Well, access to capital overall has been a concern, but it's less of a concern now, but still remains a concern. The markets are very geographic focused on a state by state basis. So there are certain states where the ability to grow is there's not enough licenses. It's a limited license state. They're hypothetically the state's going to issue 50 licenses. If you're not one of the 50, you can't play. So, that's a major hurdle. Having people that understand, right? I mean, if you think about cannabis as particularly it's different types of uses, you think about someone needs to understand how to cultivate and grow this and produce it in a large scale fashion. And, just because someone grew it in their basement in college doesn't mean that they actually know how to run a cultivation facility. So having people that are skilled and understand how to be a cultivator, how to maximize, the efficiencies of the growing cycle and take advantage of that is another important skill. And then once the business gets to the point where it's thinking about growth in a meaningful way, how do you attract skilled management? And a lot of people think, hey, I got it up and running, I'm the entrepreneur, I don't need other people, I know how to do it. But the reality of it is, I mean, if you look at Bill Gates, he knew he needed to bring in Steve Ballmer to run the business. He might have invented Microsoft, but he needed someone to run the day-to-day. A lot of these folks think they don't need those people, or they think just because someone worked at a big company, they have the skill set. And really, it's attracting the right kind of people, the right kind of capital, and the right resources to really create a successful enterprise.
That makes a lot of sense. Your passion's obvious. What do you like best about what you do?
I love working with passionate people and really trying to help them in their journey to attain a much greater level of success. I mean, that's what's rewarding, right? It's hard, being successful with a new idea and creating that new idea into a business that can be successful and rewarding is a lot harder than people think. And being part of that journey and helping an entrepreneur be successful in that is something that we love to do.
What have been some of the biggest lessons you've learned along the way in the 30 years of investment banking and M&A experience?
Wow, that's a big takeaway. I think the most important thing is don't underestimate the importance of people. A great manager of a business can make a bad business successful, and a poor manager of a business can make a successful business a failure. And so you're really investing in people, even though there's a lot that goes around it. You're ultimately investing in good people.
What do you think the time horizon is for cannabis before it gets to the point where a lot of these hurdles that you're benefiting from, kind of get erased and it becomes more commonplace? We won't quote you.
No, I think it's a multi-step process. A lot of people thought when Biden was elected that all these barriers were going to be knocked down, and all of a sudden a lot more capital came into the market. They thought all of a sudden there was going to be federal legalization. That didn't happen. What everybody's sort of learning is that's going to be a process in and of itself. When they figure out federal legalization, it's not going to be all of a sudden that things change and there's a magic wand, right? All of a sudden, all the federal agencies that now touch this are going to do what they do, right? If you're a regulator, your job is to regulate. So you think about when hemp was federally approved, all of a sudden the FDA came out and said on March 19th of 2019, we're going to tell you what the regulation is to ingest a hemp-derived product, CBD, effectively. We're still waiting. It's almost 2 years later, we're still waiting. So I don't think people have realized that, totally comprehended that even federal legalization is going to require the federal, arms of government time to figure out what all that means. And until sort of all that gets cleared, I think we're going to have to see all that happen before you see a cannabis business look exactly like a consumer packaged good company that's selling sneakers. And we're some number of years away from that.
You've achieved an immense amount of success and worked on some incredible deals over your career. What's your biggest challenge now?
Actually, we have the same challenge that the companies have, is access to capital. the biggest funds in cannabis would be deemed the tiniest funds in the non-cannabis world. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of firms that are multi-billion-dollar funds in the regular world. There's not a single one in the cannabis sector. A big fund is a few $100 million. And so access to capital is an issue for us as providers of capital, as well as for the companies. And all of that's getting better. But I think that, until all the gates sort of open, it's easier for someone to open a gate and write a check in many ways, other than maybe the top dozen companies to us, because we can show an institutional track record. And they're one step removed, let us do our job. But, until that sort of goes up and down the whole life cycle, we've still got a ways to go.
How are you attracting investment capital for your funds at this point?
We're telling the story. We're telling you the same story that we're outlining to you. And people get it, right? They understand the size of the market. They understand, or hopefully they do after we speak. They understand what the opportunities are and the growth that's happening, and they're willing to take effectively a little more risk for a greater return. And if they believe that risk reward quotient works the same way we do, then we're lucky and we have investors, and we've been fortunate. We've been able to attract some great investors, but we're always looking for more.
With all that you've shared, is there anything you want to share that I didn't think to ask you yet?
I guess, there are a couple things that I think are sort of interesting. Number one, I think a lot of folks sort of think about cannabis and they may try to tie it to alcohol. When you think about cannabis, the three major uses from all the surveys are out there are for pain relief, anxiety, and sleep. They're really much more medicinal than most people think about, hey, I'm going to go get drunk or I'm going to go get high. So number one, there's a big medicinal aspect to this that I think is overlooked, and that's what the vast majority of the product's being used for, number one. Number two, there's a whole new world of pharmaceutical experimentation that's going on using cannabinoids. And there are a number of drugs that are FDA approved from cannabis-derived products that are incredibly successful. And there is tens of millions of dollars being spent in research around the world that I think are going to come out with some really exciting new drugs. And I think people don't necessarily appreciate the medicinal and wellness benefits that the actual cannabis plant represents. And so I think that's worth noting.
Absolutely. Where can our folks who are interested in learning more about what you're doing go to learn more?
So we have a website, Emerald Park Capital. There's contact information on there. They can also go to LinkedIn and look up Emerald Park Capital or look me up as well. But happy to talk to any interested parties and would love the opportunity to share what we know.
All right. Well, we greatly appreciate your time. We know it's incredibly valuable. This has been Seth Green with Joel Magerman of Emerald Park Capital. Joel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Seth. Have a good day.
Thanks everybody for watching or listening. We'll see you next time.